Hello, I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, a US-backed proposal to lease a 32-kilometer stretch of territory linking Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan raises questions over sovereignty. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan holds a marathon press conference on regional connectivity, Armenia's EU path, the CSTO, and more. And from detention, Russian-Armenian billionaire Samvel Karapetyan announces plans to launch a new political party. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
This week, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan was in Brussels for high-level talks with European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In a joint press release, the EU and Armenia said they had reaffirmed and advanced their partnership during the meeting. Both Costa and von der Leyen expressed strong support for Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and ongoing ambitious reform agenda. The leaders welcomed the recent political agreement on the EU-Armenia new partnership agenda. They also highlighted progress in the visa liberalization process and Armenia's recent adoption of a law to launch the country's European integration process. European leaders also voiced support for Armenia's Crossroads of Peace initiative and acknowledged the country's efforts to promote stability in the South Caucasus, especially through peace talks with Azerbaijan and steps towards normalizing ties with Turkey. The EU reiterated its commitment to Armenia's long-term development and resilience. Under the Global Gateway Strategy, EU investments in Armenia are now expected to reach 2.5 billion euros, focusing on inclusive growth and improved regional connectivity. They also discussed regional cooperation, noting the importance of potentially including Armenia in the broader EU economic and strategic initiatives, especially those tied to the Black Sea region. Costa and von der Leyen thanked Armenia for its cooperation on preventing sanctions circumvention, and all three leaders agreed to continue working together on this front. Security and defense were also on the agenda. The EU and Armenia have launched security and defense consultations, underscoring their shared interest in peace, democratic resilience, and regional stability. They also touched on foreign information manipulation, disinformation, and cyber threats, and agreed to work together to assess Armenia's needs and boost cooperation in these areas as well. And finally, to support Armenia's information space, the EU announced a new €1.5 million package to strengthen independent media in the country.
After the visit to Brussels, Pashinyan then went on to Paris to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. The latter reiterated France's support for Pashinyan's courageous efforts to work toward peace with Azerbaijan. Macron said the meeting was also an opportunity to further discuss bilateral strategic partnership. In late May, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot had stated during his visit to Yerevan that Paris and Yerevan will formally elevate their ties to one of a strategic partnership. And in a developing story, and one that has caught the attention and imagination, let's say, of political pundits, ordinary people, and people like ourselves, on July 11, U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Thomas Barak suggested during a press conference in New York City that the U.S. is considering, and these are all words that he used, which should be taken with a grain of salt, taking over the Sunni route based on a 100-year lease. And so he's basically saying that America is going to come in and we talked about this last week, and sort of manage the functions or the functionality of this 32-kilometer stretch of territory linking mainland Azerbaijan with its exclave Nakhichevan.
He was talking a little bit like, you guys are fighting over it, so let us come take over. Yeah, and then you can all share it.
Yeah, and he went on talking about tribalism and stuff like this anyway. So Prime Minister Pashinyan's spokesperson Nazeli Baghdasaryan responded that Armenia is discussing the issue of unblocking regional infrastructure exclusively within the framework of its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction. And as for land leasing, Baghdasaryan stated that under Armenian legislation, such an arrangement exists only for agricultural purposes. Therefore, the option mentioned by the U.S. ambassador, she said, is not possible. Now, the idea of the U.S. or an American company managing the Sunni route, which would connect Azerbaijan, as I said, with Nakhichevan, was revealed on July 1 by Onesia Vartanyan in a piece she wrote for the Carnegie Endowment. for International Peace, saying that Washington has reportedly proposed a U.S. business participation as a stabilizing force in the route. Now, people have been saying that Armenia is giving up its sovereignty. I did a podcast with Nikol Pashinyan, which we're going to be publishing, I think, on Sunday, Rub, and we sort of dive into what this really means and what the U.S. proposal is all about. And, we looked at comparisons. There's a Russian military base in Gyumri. By allowing a Russian military base, right, on your territory, have you given up sovereignty? Right. So we sort of looked at it, what the U.S. proposal is, what we know and what we don't know, because basically there's a lot we do not know.
And there's much more that we don't know.
Exactly.
And very little we know which hasn't been agreed on. We just know that it's being discussed.
We know that it's been proposed. I think Yerevan, from what I understand, is open to the possibility because it could serve as a means of a deterrent, because if there's American presence in Syunik, Azerbaijan isn't going to, you would think, attack. So there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know if Baku has agreed, if Baku will come back with a counteroffer, if they will say to the Trump administration, stick your nose elsewhere, and what the fallout will be. So there's a lot of unknowns.
So far, it's a good exercise in crisis, dealing with crisis.
But there's also so much emotionality and so many hysterics. Let's find out what the deal is about, and then.
Well, the prime minister gave one of his legendary 5-hour
it was short this time, actually.
5 hours.
Oh, come on, he's
almost.
done longer.
Press conferences, and he did talk quite a bit about this. Mm-hmm. So basically, I just want to recap a little bit of what we don't have in text here. He was just saying that you might hear a lot of words, words like leasing, words like, oversight. And these are all things that are being discussed, doesn't mean...
Or have been agreed to.
Have been agreed to. These are all kind of, ideas that are being thrown around at this point. But he was saying, just rest assured that everything is within Armenia sovereignty, jurisdiction, and everything else. That is not something that Armenia would compromise on. Well, as I said, he did reiterate again and again that Armenia's commitment to regional connectivity is something that Armenia is not backing off from. And he also emphasized that any agreement must respect the country's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and jurisdiction. He confirmed that proposals, including one from the U.S., are being discussed, but no final decision has been made. Yeah. Addressing the remarks made by the U.S. ambassador to Turkey regarding the possible 100-year land lease to the U.S., Pashinyan explained that Armenia's law allows for long-term development rights, which are often used to attract investment. This is kind of the continuation of what his spokesperson had said earlier, saying leasing is only for agriculture. In similar circumstances, it would be more like a development kind of a contract if it were to happen.
It's like building infrastructure, right?
Infrastructure, yes. He drew comparisons, actually, as you were saying, Maria, with existing infrastructure agreements like Zvartnot and the Shirak airports that are being operated by a foreign company under long-term concessions, yet remain fully under Armenia's control. Similarly, the South Caucasus Railway is under a Russian company without compromising sovereignty. Well, Pashinyan also noted that the Crossroads of Peace initiative isn't just about the roads and railways. It envisions a broader economic ecosystem, including pipelines, power lines, and telecom infrastructure. One proposal under discussion is to create a company to attract and manage the necessary investment for the Crossroads of Peace project. He underlined that reciprocity is key, and any road or railway access granted to Azerbaijan must be matched by Armenia's ability to reach its own regions through Azerbaijani territory. So this sentence stopped me in my tracks for a second.
You're stuck
yes,
on this.
But he explains, he says, for example, a rail line between Yerevan and Mehri would likely pass through Nakhichevan and
as it did in the Soviet era.
As it did in the Soviet era. And the road route via Nakhichevan could also reduce travel distance by more than 100 kilometers, make it the most practical road between Yerevan and Merli.
Well, he went on and commenting on Armenia's future, he said that in 20 years, he sees Armenia as a member of the European Union. He said he was directly asked whether Armenia wants to become a EU member during his visit to Brussels, and he responded affirmatively. This marks the first time Pashinyan has explicitly stated that Armenia aspires to join the European Union, a notable shift in sort of the language that they've been using since discussions around potential EU integration began in recent years.
And during the press conference, we're just presenting the highlights.
Snippets.
And he confirmed that the trilateral working group, co-chaired by the deputy prime ministers of Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan, which was tasked with unblocking regional communications, has been inactive for quite some time. He said the group's work was basically suspended or stopped due to disagreements over the wording and interpretation of key texts. Pashinyan also pointed out to the lack of trust as one of the reasons why the format is not working. And just for general information, the last time the deputy prime ministers of these three countries met was in Moscow, and this was back in 2023.
Well, the Prime Minister also commented on Armenia's frozen membership in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, saying it's more likely that Armenia will leave the Russian-led security bloc than reactivate its membership. He also spoke about Armenia-Russia relations more broadly, describing them as being in a phase of transformation. According to Pashinyan, the relationship is unlikely to return to how it was, but that doesn't necessarily mean it should deteriorate. He argued that it should evolve into something better than it was previously. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, he was quite quick to comment, on the future of Armenia-Russia relations following Pashinyan's press conference, saying Moscow is interested in developing ties with Yerevan as deeply as possible across all areas. He said Armenia believes it is pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy and is also interested in joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but stressed that Russia is seeking, quote, the closest possible cooperation. Peskov added that Moscow has observed Armenia's efforts in recent years to balance its foreign policy directions, but said time will tell what closer alignment with the EU will ultimately bring to Armenia. And regarding Armenia CSTO membership, he noted that any decision to leave the Russia-led bloc is a sovereign matter.
And in local news, Armenia's two parliamentary opposition factions have filed an application with the Constitutional Court challenging the constitutionality of a recently adopted law concerning the nationalization of the electric networks of Armenia. The ruling civil contract faction passed the law earlier this month. We've talked about it during the podcast. The opposition also requested that the law be suspended until the court reaches a decision. According to Artsvik Minasyan, the legislation violates the Constitution on at least 3 counts. He noted that under the new provisions, the electrical networks of Armenia could be stripped of its license without a court ruling. Additionally, mechanisms have been introduced that could allow the state to deprive the company's owner of their property through means not permitted by the Constitution. Minasyan also raised concerns that the law retroactively enables the government to hold the company liable for past violations. The opposition parliament members also criticized the legislative process, stating that no public discussions were held and that the required procedures, such as obtaining opinions from relevant bodies, were not followed. Well, under Armenia's legal framework, the Constitutional Court has 3 days to notify the applicant if any deficiencies are in their filing. That means if anything is missing. And after that, 20 days to decide whether the case is admitted or not.
Well, meanwhile, Russian-Armenian businessman Samvel Karapetyan, who owns Electric Networks Armenia, has been charged with money laundering in addition to attempting to usurp constitutional order. According to Karapetyan's defense team, the money laundering case alleges that the offense was committed through the activities of several companies, but does not cite any specific action linking him, directly or indirectly, to the alleged crime. The indictment also makes no reference to concealment or misrepresentation of funds, nor to any managerial decisions or property dealings. The defense argues that the charges are unsubstantiated and reflect a broader trend in which money laundering accusations have become increasingly common in politically sensitive cases.
Well, this week Karapetyan also announced that he plans to form a new political party while he is still in pretrial detention. Karapetyan expressed respect for the political opposition to Pashinyan's government that exists in Armenia, but he said he and his team have their own vision for Armenia's future. While not ruling out potential cooperation with like-minded groups, he indicated that they intend to pursue an independent political path. Karapetyan also stated that they aim to unite the public around what he described as just and ambitious goals, rejecting what he called the government's black and white divisions that, in his view, have polarized and weakened society. The fallout with the government began in mid-June when Karapetyan publicly criticized what he described as a campaign against the Armenian Apostolic Church by the Prime Minister. He stated that he had always stood with the church and the Armenian people and announced his readiness to directly participate in political life. At the time, he said that if political forces fail to succeed, we will participate in our own way, a remark that ultimately led to his detention on charges of making public calls to seize power.
And in related news, 5 of the 7 members of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation who were detained on charges related to terrorism preparation and illegal possession of weapons have been released. The remaining 2, Andranik Chamichian and Alexan Asadorian, are still in custody. Chamichian has been charged with preparing an act of terrorism, while Asadorian is accused of illegal possession of firearms. The rest followed a law enforcement operation last week that uncovered remote-controlled electronic detonators, grenades, grenade fuses, explosives, and other related materials.
And this week, former mayor of Vaghashabat, this is more commonly known as Echmiadzin, the city, Diana Gasparian, was formally charged with criminal offenses. The Anti-Corruption Committee has not yet disclosed the specific charges against her, but announced it will provide details soon. Criminal proceedings were launched in December of 2023 following a media report that alleged Gasparian's mother-in-law had begun illegal construction in Echmiadzin. Gasparian announced her resignation this May, citing her desire to spend more time with her newborn and her family. There were also cases reporting regarding her father-in-law's business involvement. Well, Argishti Mekhakian was meanwhile appointed acting head of Echmiadzin this week. Local council elections are scheduled for November 16.
Also this week, the investigative committee filed charges against a number of individuals. These include Dikran Markaryan, the former head of Yerevan's Nornork district, city council member Mesrop Manukyan, civic activist Artur Chakhoyan, and 3 district employees following a series of confrontations at the district administration building back in April. Markaryan and 3 staffers are accused of physically assaulting Chakhoyan as a group attack. Chakhoyan and Manukyan have both been charged with hooliganism. On April 28th, just as a reminder, we reported about this. Markaryan and Chakhoyan reportedly exchanged insults over the phone. The next day, Chakhoyan and Manukyan entered the Nornork district office with members of the press. There they played the phone recording, displayed photos of Markaryan, and poured a white liquid on them, and investigators say disrupted work and disrupted public order. During a public hearing at the same office, Markaryan and others allegedly confronted and assaulted Chakhoyan in the reception area, causing him minor injuries. The 2 incidents were combined into a single case, which has now been sent to the prosecutor for possible trial. And Dikran Markaryan, who was the head, at first, I think he apologized, and then he resigned, and now he's been officially charged.
And another ongoing story.
Yeah.
Well, flower growers from Armenia's Armavir region protested this week along the Yerevan-Armavir highway, displaying flowers. They say they can no longer sell due to Russia's ban on Armenia's flower imports. Armenian officials say they are working closely with Russia and have already allowed 7 companies to continue exporting. Dikran Bedrosyan, head of Armenia's food safety inspection body, said they are in daily talks with Russian regulators about the export issue. He explained that Armenia is taking responsibility by conducting accelerated audits in local greenhouses. Inspections will evaluate plants on site, and certificates will only be issued to growers who meet the standards. Bedrosyan acknowledged past abuses in the export process, where some companies were set up temporarily, sometimes just for one day, and then quickly closed. I understand it's flowers, they don't live long with companies, one-day companies. These companies took advantage of simplified customs controls within the Eurasian Economic Union by quickly moving goods across the border without proper oversight or paying taxes. This loophole has caused Russian authorities to raise concerns. Russian authorities offered to send experts to assess with the inspections, but Armenia decided to proceed independently to avoid delays. The Russian side may also monitor inspections remotely via video calls. Despite government assurances, growers remain frustrated, arguing that inspectors cannot physically check all greenhouses in time, risking spoilage of flowers. Meanwhile, Economy Minister Nikol Pashinyan said that from July 1 until 14, 103 trucks carrying Armenian brandy entered Russia via Georgia. For a long time, Georgian authorities had blocked the transit of products from several Armenian brandy and wine exporters, citing, again, quality inspection issues.
And as always, we do a quick recap of the articles we've published this week. Today, a piece by Sandra Sadek called Russia's Election Interference Playbook. And we know that Armenia is preparing for parliamentary elections in 2026. And she writes, after doing exhaustive research and talking to many people, early signs show intensified Russian interest in possible interference. And what can Yerevan learn from the experiences of Moldova and Romania? And it's a pretty long explainer, but interesting read for sure.
And another article that's getting a lot of reaction on social media.
I wonder why.
Why Armenian children eat so much sugar. It's by Lori Yumshajakyan. She says candy, cake, and compote are staples of childhood in Armenia, not only because they taste good, but because they're inseparable from cultural ways of showing love, and that's very true. However, she says this is one tradition that we might have to rethink very soon, looking at the numbers of amount of sugar that Armenian children consume,
obesity,
at home, at work, at school.
No, I know it's crazy, but it's a great piece. We have Art Speak by our resident art writer, I guess, cultural writer, Christopher Atamian. It's called The Art Factory, Armenia's Answer to Andy Warhol. And he writes about the Art Factory just outside of Yerevan, and he says it channels the spirit of Warhol's studio, blending creative experimentation with community. Atamian says it's a bold cultural space and hub for contemporary art, reshaping Armenia's art scene through residencies, exhibitions, and a vision for global dialogue.
Well, and another column by Maria Kungo. It's called Sevan on My Skin.
I love this piece.
Yes, it's really hot in Yerevan.
Oh, God,
and
yes.
Talking about traditions, it has been my tradition here in Yerevan as well to make sure to go to Sevan every summer as much as I can, because that contrast of that cold water with the what she is calling the pink oven Yerevan is really refreshing, but also very Maria Kungo-esque in her style. She talks about memory and joy and feeling comfortable in her own skin.
Yeah, it was a great process. I laughed out loud several times, so I enjoyed that. And another piece that we've been looking forward to publishing is called Guess Guess, Half Hidden, Half Lost, talking about Hamshan Armenians without labels. This is by Ondercan Muti. He talks about it was really interesting because, we know about the Hamshan Armenians, Ruben. We think everybody knows about them, but in reality, a lot of Armenians don't know about them. So he writes that centuries of forced migration, conversion, and marginalization have shaped the unique identity of Hamshan Armenians. He explores their complex history, evolving identity, and invites reflection on preservation, memory, and belonging.
And also the opening line kind of was interesting for me because
cultural appropriation.
When Armenians dance Hamshan dances at Cascade, is it cultural appropriation? I'd never thought of it. I'm one of those people who enjoy it. I go to several concerts here in Armenia that recently we've had.
You don't know until you walk in a person's shoes, and we don't understand. And there were a lot of things I didn't know either that were revelatory for me when I read the piece. So it's a really good one. And also, as a reminder, on Sunday we'll be having a podcast. EVN talks with Nerses Kopalian about this Sunnic route. So have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we will be back again next week.